It definitely does feel like the end of summer, but I'm excited you got to this and we're speaking. In any case, number one, climate has its day in court. What happened?
Yeah, it was a really big moment. I mean, some said it was a groundbreaking moment for climate change. We will see the real impact. But basically, what happened was that a group of students from Vanuatu, an island in the Pacific Ocean, which is at risk of essentially ceasing to exist because of climate change and rising sea levels, they managed to get all the way to the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the world, after passing through the UN General Assembly and other steps. And the ICJ eventually passed this verdict, which essentially says that countries are responsible for climate change and their inaction to prevent it. And what that means is that it creates a precedent in international law that hopefully others will be able to build on, to hold countries accountable for their inaction when it comes to climate change. Now, one can discuss, how will this be enforced? What difference will it really make? That's where I think a lot of the debate is still happening. But undoubtedly, it's a big step when the highest court in the world takes a clear stance on the fact that governments should get their act together. And if they're not, they should be held accountable.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that even those same countries led the charge for 1.5 targets. So,
And they're already making migration plans for an entire country. Like, yeah, so I'm glad that it's nice to see an empowering success for these people at this level.
and hence why we started Legion 44, and it's like the sort of the target and the reason for action now rather than waiting for emissions reduction only. Um,
Yes.
in any case, number two, Germany still leads. It's very true.
Yeah, for me, this has been incredible to see because I mean, I'm German, no big secret here. And 2.5 years ago, I founded the first, at the time, National CDR Association in Germany, the DVNE. And at the time when I went to Berlin and I spoke to folks, nobody was talking about carbon removals. Nobody really understood much what carbon removal was. And in just 2.5 years, which for policy is incredibly fast, we saw a lot of positive things happening. I mean, in this show, we've already spoken about a lot of the successes, such as embedding net zero in the constitution as the first country in the world, for example. But now they've actually done two big things. One is to assign 500 million euros, so almost half a billion euros, to CDR over the next few years. So there's real money on the table. And the second thing is they have now the plan to create a CDR department in the Ministry of the Environment. And I don't know of any other CDR department in any government in the world, to be honest. I know of carbon management at best with some CDR people, but having a CDR department would be a real game changer. So for me, this is fantastic. And in personal news, I was re-elected as the chair of the DVNE, so I get to do this work for another 2 years. And very excited about that because now it seems like there's real momentum building in Europe's biggest economy. Yeah, very keen to see what's going to happen there.
Yeah, I mean, having a dedicated full department really means that you're in business for that. So that's really good.
Exactly.
And I've noticed that Germany and German speaking people in general are taking the lead on this in many ways. But you're saying in number three that the UK trades up, and so not to be outdone, or maybe also trying, is the UK. So what are they doing?
It's positive to see. I mean, the UK obviously, um, they had an election last year, and we saw a landslide win for the Labour government. They picked up a lot of the pieces that the previous government had already put in place for climate and for carbon removals as well. And now there's been a specific proposal around emission trading system regulation. They've got their own ETS. It's a tenth of the size of the European one, but it's still a very big one for a national one. And what's interesting here is that they plan to integrate carbon removals and integrate it potentially quicker than the EU. The EU is planning 2031. The UK could be doing 2029. And also, they've taken a slightly more technology agnostic approach. At least when you read their opinion, it sounds like they're open towards things like enhanced rock weathering, towards things like biochar, and not just DAX and BEX. So really good stuff. And now I guess we need to see what they eventually decide to do and by when. But I'm glad to see that the UK is trying to be a first mover here and potentially even move quicker than the EU.
And on the subject of DAX, BEX, and biochar, it looks like this number 4 is the CRCF methodology is still simmering. Why is it so hard to come up with methodology? Why is it a heated debate around things like biochar, DAX, and BEX?
I mean, we have on the voluntary carbon market, we have methodologies for all the 3 technologies you just mentioned. In the case of biochar, there's 5 or 6, there's several, right? And what they're trying to do in Europe is to come up with kind of one that's that's the gold standard. And it's so freaking difficult. I mean, they've had 7, 8 expert group meetings. Now they've reached a final draft for each, and they've actually already released it since I sent the newsletter for public consultation. So everyone can now read it and submit their own opinion on this. And their plan is to then essentially finalize it by the end of the year. But I mean, I've been part of these discussions, and finding agreement on what the gold standard is really hard, because you've got obviously academia, civil society, industry, and government usually pushing in different directions. So where do you find the common ground? And what's making it even harder is, and taking biochar as a good example, it's work in progress. Like there was one way to certify biochar that we've used, and most standards still use, which is kind of a decay function without getting too technical. And now there's a new one, an inertinite function, which has come up just in the last year or so. And so do you take it in? Do you leave it out? And right now, for example, with this example, the commission decided to take both and allow both, which is, I think, the right thing to do, but it's also confusing because then it's not a gold standard. There are 2 ways to do it in one methodology. So it's really complicated work. I think they've done a terrific job. Not everyone is happy with what they've done. There's some people that are saying we should axe it all together. I think that would be a great mistake. But yeah, in a fast-moving field, it's hard to standardize.
Well, especially because it's nature, and I mean more nature than, let's just say, direct air capture, where you're taking something and turning it into rock and you can measure it. And I mean, you can do the
But
same
even
measurements, but it's very
there,
different. Yeah,
I mean,
I
even
guess
there,
so.
take DAX. A
Yeah.
big question is, you build a DAX facility, and you need to obviously account the emissions of the DAX facility and deduct them from the carbon removal. So it's really important if you account for the emissions of a 10-year running facility, 20 or 30 years. But we don't know how long these are going to run. And we don't know if in 10 years we think like, oh, what the hell did we build there? We've got much better stuff that we should build now, right? So that's just one example where even in DAX, yeah, you might be able to measure the removal really easily, but how to account for the emissions associated with DAX is actually really hard.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
tough questions.
Yeah, that's interesting. And to the point of number 5, you say like settlers of Catan for CDR, they're trying to compare these different removal factors for markets, I guess, right? So 2 biochar carbon removal equals 1 direct air capture to that point, right? How are you going to do that?
Yeah, that was just, I
That
mean,
seems really hard also.
as a big Settlers of Catan fan, I couldn't not do that comparison, but obviously it's not that simple. But bottom line is we're trying to create a liquid fungible market for carbon removal where a buyer can trade a ton of CDR and it doesn't matter how that ton was removed. Right now, we are so far away from that. There's some people who say we shouldn't reach that point because they stress that, for example, the co-benefits vary too much. And I hear that. But eventually, if we want to get the financial markets interested and really scale this, we need to have a fungible unit. And for that purpose, it could be a good idea to create some sort of conversion factor, right? But to me, it's just the wrong direction because at the end of the day, a ton removed is a ton removed. And a much more straightforward approach is we agree on what's the minimum threshold, for example, in terms of permanence, in terms of quality, in terms of MRV. And whatever passes that should be comparable. We don't
That
really
makes
care then
sense.
if it's
Yeah,
removed for 5,000 years or 15,000 years. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter, right? And
right.
but that's what they're discussing. I don't think they're going to get far with this idea of conversion factors because it's so complex to do.
And
But it
maybe
is
too
something that they're
soon.
playing around with.
Maybe too
Sorry?
soon. Maybe too soon, right? Because you're dealing with all these other sort of standards anyway. So you're trying to put a level of clarity on something that hasn't yet matured.
And there's
Um,
also where this is coming from, I think, which is a question that
mhm,
we haven't spoken about much, is
mhm.
the whole nature-based side, right?
Mhm.
They're obviously trying to get a slice of the pie, and they have good arguments. Like if it is, we had a really good CDR policy scoop with Gabriel Walker recently, which I've also linked in the newsletter on nature versus tech, right, or
Mhm.
permanent versus temporary. And there's this continuous challenge that everyone's trying to carve out their own slice of the pie, and usually at the expense of the other one. And so the conversion factor idea is quite neat because suddenly you could have it all, right? You could, if you said
Yeah.
whatever, 10 afforestation credits equal one DEX credit, fine. If you can make it cost competitive, then let's do it.
Mhm.
So I do think we need to find ways to also power the scale up of nature-based solutions because they're available today, they're cheaper, and they remove carbon, right? So
Right.
that's one of the plus sides maybe of this whole discussion.
Yeah, and that's the subject of my next film. So
I know.
we wanted to get in. I mean, actually, I wanted to put it in Legion 44, but as you know, things got very complex very quickly in terms of so many pathways of the additional removals. Uh, and the nature side was supposed to be in there, but so now we're doing that. And as you know, it's funny because the same group, I mean, this debate, bleeds into everything. So if you make a movie like we did, everyone's like, oh, she hates trees. It's like, no, I don't hate trees. It's just it didn't fit in the film in terms of time, and so we're getting to the nature removals now. But it's funny
Excited for
how,
it.
yeah, I'm excited too, but it's interesting how people immediately, I guess it's like you're only as good as your last film, right? So anyway, so, which now bleeds into number six, call to recognize global south removals. Um, I guess you're saying here that the EU wasn't meeting its target, so now the global south is saying, hey, what about ours? Include ours in your EU regime? Is that what that is? Or
Um,
how's that?
Paraphrased a little bit, yeah, but basically the EU has released, we spoke about this in the previous episode, released a 2040 target suggestion, and they've introduced so-called flexibilities because they don't think they can achieve it all domestically. And one of this flexibility is a 3% non-EU credits inclusion. Now, the 3% is actually against 1919 levels. If you look at what that means, that actually could end up being as much as 20 or 30% of the 2040 levels. So it's a bit misleading, to be honest. It's a really high amount. It sounds small, but it's actually really high if you look behind the details. And so there's a lot of pushback against this idea that Europe is lowering its climate ambition, that almost a third of the work is going to be outsourced abroad. And earlier this year, and this is really good timing, I helped set up the Global South CDR Coalition, which brings together all the big carbon removal companies from the Global South with the intention of giving them a voice in Brussels, primarily in Brussels right now in Europe. And then this happened, which is fantastic timing. And now we're up and running, and we're essentially doing the hard work to make a case that, okay, if you're going to use international credits, let's make sure it's high integrity, durable removals, because otherwise this could really, really backfire. And so anyone who operates in the global south and wants to join the coalition, or anyone who wants to support it financially, because these companies often have less money than some of the global north companies, and we still need to pay expensive lobbyists in Brussels. So if you want to help, please do get in touch.
Nice. Good. And then, so number seven, trust builder and tech catalyst, Leila Toplich.
Yeah, this month. I mean, I every month I highlight kind of a woman in CDR that I think is really moving things. And this time I didn't have to look far because it's my colleague, Leila at Carbon Future, who has a background in AI, in tech, worked at Microsoft for a long time. And yeah, she brings a fantastic perspective to the sector and is hyper focused on the intersection of tech and CDR and trust. And this is something that I think is really, really important because at the end of the day, in carbon removal, all we do is sell an invisible product. So without trust, people will not support it. And so, yeah, anyone who's interested should give her a follow. She writes a lot of summaries from her experiences, from her travels, from her trips, from her events. Yeah, give her a follow.
And then moving on to accelerating the industry, Remove is opening their next round of applications. Number eight is Get Ready, Set, and Apply. So Remove is launching their next round. Does it
Yeah,
have a
Remove, for
particular
those who don't
focus?
know, is, I would say, the leading carbon removal accelerator. They started off with a European accelerator, then they opened up an India one, now they've opened up an Africa one. They've already had more than 100 companies go through the accelerator. And what they do, which is really nice, they obviously provide all the usual stuff from accelerators, like advisory service. Like I'm, for example, a policy advisor to some of their startups every time. But also they provide non-dilutive grants to all of their to all of their companies. And right now for India and Europe, they've opened the application. So especially for early stage CDR companies who are looking to, for their first sale, for a little bit of cash and for some advice, they should definitely apply. It's a rite of passage in the CDR sector.
That's awesome. And number 9, Race to Zero. Add this to your bookshelf.
Yeah, it's the first book purely on CDR that I'm familiar with. It's written by Marian Krüger, who's actually the person who also runs Remove, and Benedikt Probst, an ETH researcher. They had the German version last year, and now they've translated it and got the English version out. I'm one of 30 CDR experts who are also featured in the book. It's a really good book, especially, I would say, for people who are less familiar with CDR or who are working in corporate sustainability. I think it's very focused on kind of activating buyers, which is exactly what we need. But yeah, it's a great read. You can just order it off Amazon now. So go out there, check it out. There are not many CDR books, so I recommend it.
Definitely then. And last but not least, CDR 101. So our number 10, I like how you put that. CDR 101, Back to Basics. Robert Hoagland is explaining CDR in a 5-part series, right?
Yeah, they have launched kind of an email course. Similar, I also did an email course early in the year, and they seem to like the format. So they've also launched an email course now. And it's focused on the basics of carbon removal by Robert, who I like to feature regularly in my newsletter. Robert wrote this with his colleagues, Even and Aidan from Milky Wire. And yeah, it's a fantastic new resource available. And I always like to feature kind of resources that free resources in particular, that people can use to get up and running in CDR.
Nice. And that's it, basically. I think that I'm looking at hopefully the U.S. Department of Energy is still going to invest in DAC pilot projects. Do we have any update on that or no? Right? Because I was looking at news to talk about, but we don't know yet.
Complete radio silence, unfortunately.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, we'll see what happens. I am obviously interested since
I know we all are, but right now, I mean, yeah. It's been quite sad just to see how things have evolved, right? And there was still some hope that we would see things move in the last few months, but it's just been complete silence.
Yeah, there's been other things going on, but maybe we'll see. We're obviously going to keep tracking that. So, well, that's great. I think that August is now a wrap and we can get into fall. I can feel the fall coming. So everyone just enjoy the last few weeks of summer because I can feel a big fall coming for sure.
And we'll talk again in a month's time.
Okay.
Thanks, Leila.
Take care.